I'm Dennis Anderson, and here what's coming up on Almanac North. Duluth's new school superintendent comes to the job at an unprecedented time and had to hit the ground running to deal with the COVID pandemic. We will talk with him tonight. Some parents are taking matters into their own hands and forming homeschool networks. We talked with the creator of one of those groups. And on Minnesota's northern border, the Rainy River, once clogged and polluted, has made quite a rebound thanks to some very hard work. These stories coming up on Almanac North. Hello and welcome once again to Almanac North. We thank you very much for watching. Julie Zenner is off tonight as we alternate hosting during the pandemic. This week's show was recorded on Thursday afternoon. Well, as schools decide how and if they will open as the pandemic continues, many parents are weighing their options. A Healthline Media survey found only about 10% of parents feel comfortable sending their kids back to school. As uncertainty lingers, the Duluth Homeschooling Mutual Aid Network group has formed on Facebook. The creator of that group is a substitute teacher who has decided not to go back into the classroom this fall because of the pandemic. Almanac North producer Ramona Morozes spoke with her earlier this week.
My name is Heidi Bach-Hansen. I'm the organizer of a mutual aid network called the Duluth Homeschooling Mutual Aid Network. It's an organization that's about helping each other through this educational crisis, the portion of a crisis that is much larger than that, but just oriented towards helping parents and kids who need access to information and materials and learning opportunities that are safe, outdoor, socially distanced, all those things. We're in an unprecedented time educationally and societally, and what we choose to do with that time and making it productive in a positive community-based way. I mean, that's what this is about. I can't imagine having a kid at home and knowing you're, not having anyone to talk through what you need educationally for your child. I'm a stepmom to two grown kids. I recognize that being able to homeschool is a privilege that a lot of people can't choose for a number of reasons. But if it's one of those things where they really want to choose that, but just need some help, that's certainly something we feel like we can help folks out with. I think the main concern would be the idea that if parents who have a lot of privilege can pull their kids out, how does that affect the children who don't have those choices? And I think that's why we got to this point with the Mutual Aid Network. As far as homeschooling goes, we're kind of entering a different era in that this is not really homeschooling. This is, like they said, crisis schooling. It's trying to figure our way through a very complicated situation. There's a lot of parents who will just homeschool for the duration. They have no intention of necessarily keeping their kid out forever. If you pull a child out, you have to make that notification legally to the superintendent saying you're doing so, following the same rules, the same law. That is, and we have it on a document, if people, in a pretty simple language that lets people understand what it is they need to do. I don't necessarily feel comfortable encouraging people to, flee the school system or something. I think people should do what they want to. If I were going to go into a school building, I would be anxious. Yeah. So I hope that schools do what they say they're going to do to make that the safest thing possible. I'm not certain that scientifically that is possible right now. Not right now. Have you ever tried to keep a mask on a child for 8 hours? I haven't tried that yet. And I do have friends feeling like if I send my kid to school, I'm a bad mom, or if I don't send him to school, I'm a bad mom. No one should be in the business of judging someone who's they're not being unsafe. They're doing what they feel is right for their kid. Community is something one should be able to depend on, and that in times of crisis, I can't think hugely. I like to think in a very specific local way. What can I personally do? And so this was just the thing that I knew I could do based on what I know how to do. But I think for all of us, we need to do what we can to help each other through this in whatever way, whatever talents we've got.
Heidi Bach Hansen says the deadline to submit an intent to homeschool is October 1st, and many parents are waiting to hear final plans from their school district before making a decision on homeschooling. The Duluth Public School District is the largest in our region, and last week the Duluth School Board voted on its education plan for the fall. Duluth's new school leader will be charged with carrying out that plan amid the uncertainty of the pandemic. And so joining us now is John Magus, on the job since July as Duluth School Superintendent. Superintendent, welcome so much to the program tonight. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very kindly. Now, obviously you have found that this is quite a challenge to just start a new job, and as big as this, with a pandemic taking place. How do you balance, do you think, the health decisions with what might be best for the students?
I think that's really the essential question to all of this. How do you work to make sure that you're maximizing safety for students and staff and families while trying to make sure learning is an engaging opportunity as possible for the kids? And sometimes in this situation, the two most important things for a district to keep kids safe and to make sure they learn, sometimes it becomes a balance between the two and making sure that you're making the right choice.
As we saw in that piece before I introduced you, some parents don't think it's safe to send children to the classroom. What do you say to them?
Sure. I think it's important for all parents to be able to make a choice, and that's why when we put forward our plan for Duluth, we offer distance learning, not just the distance learning we had in an emergency setting, but an enhanced distance learning for our students. So students have that choice, parents have that choice to engage in that distance learning, or right now we're looking at the hybrid model for both secondary and elementary, which allows for some in-person learning, but with many, many extra safety precautions with distancing, extra cleaning, many things.
So can you walk us a little bit more through the plan the district came up with and finalized?
Sure. So the plan is based on the governor's order to ensure that we had 3 plans ready, and those 3 plans were distance learning, or enhanced distance learning in the case of Duluth, hybrid, which is a combination of distance learning and in-person learning. So in-person learning is basically when everybody is there face-to-face. There are still safety precautions, but it's generally only put in place when things are not as severe. Recently, a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, the governor announced that there were a variety of different safety measures that they wanted us to look at. They wanted us to consider the number of COVID cases per 10,000 in the county and go with a model based on that. So in doing so, we actually chose a model that was not according to what exactly according to what the guidelines were based on the number. It's actually considered a couple of steps more safe than what was intended. And we did so because we wanted to make sure that the first priority of making sure kids were safe and families were safe, that's one that we really have to adhere to.
So on the first day of school, what's going to happen? Will the schools themselves be open for in-class learning?
So we are going to have a period of engagement and welcoming activities. There will be some opportunities for in-person meeting of teachers and things of that nature, but it's also focused on making sure that our distance learning and hybrid learning and the procedures for safety are all put in place. So it's a lot of welcoming opportunities, engagement and learning, and an opportunity for parents to really understand what our new system will look like. Because we're really moving forward with a couple of new technology measures that I think will be new and important for families.
Sure.
And I can talk about that as well.
I would imagine that teachers must be feeling some nervousness too about going back to the classroom. John, what are you hearing from them?
I think it's really difficult because I'm hearing from teachers and other staff that they're in the field because they love kids and they want to be with kids and they care about kids. They're also concerned about their own safety, and they're concerned about the safety of kids, of our students. So it's a balance of really wishing they could be there, but also wanting to make sure that they're as safe as possible.
If you discover that COVID is being transmitted in the schools, is there a plan to deal with that?
Yes. We are working to be really responsive, and we're working with the state and county health officials, as well as seeking CDC guidance. So we're ready to, if necessary, we're able to close down schools, we're able to close down particular classrooms. We're also available to shift models if need be. So if we had to go from a hybrid model to a distance learning model, we would be ready to do so very quickly.
When it comes to making a decision whether to send kids to the classroom or do some at-home learning, I would assume that's left to the parents, not the school district?
So it's on an individual basis, it's left to the parents. So the parents always have a choice. They can do the distance learning. And the distance learning, when we had to close and do things on an emergency basis, it was packets. Now we have learning management systems, we have devices, and that's a better choice, a better option for folks. But we really also know that some kids benefit more from being in person. And so if we can have some in-person education, we think it's really critical that we offer that.
You mentioned distance learning a few times in our conversation here, and it made it sound like distance learning today is going to be far different from what it was like in the spring. It almost sounds like it was an experiment back then. What's changed?
Sure. So what happened in March in districts across the country is at the flip of a switch, we shut off our in-person learning and switched to doing the best that we could based on the current reality, the current resources, and also it was very challenging for people to be able to get devices and materials to students. So it was an emergency distance learning, an emergency plan that was put into place. But we really have to make sure that we're learning as much as possible from the events that occurred and making improvements on how we're delivering education. So we focused on professional learning for our staff. We focused on buying new devices for our students, making sure that we had hotspots and internet connectivity for all of our students. That was huge. And we're also getting, we're buying a learning management system for secondary called Canvas, and one for elementary called Seesaw. And it really allows the teachers and the parents and the students to all connect through that learning management system.
It was expressed in the video piece we saw before we started to talk. The question was raised, how do you keep masks on very young kids, kindergarten, first graders?
Sure. So we have had a lot of opportunity to see what that looks like with some of our summer programming and early childhood education. And for some students, it is a challenge, but we have seen that our students are wearing masks and they're getting used to it. It's not easy. This is a sacrifice that we're all having to make, but it's something that we need to do to ensure safety.
A lot of kids are transported to and from school by school bus. Can you address the school bus issue a little bit with distance? With trying to keep some kind of a distance between each of us, that's going to mean small populations of students in the buses.
Sure. So, and that's a particular challenge in Duluth because, as we know, it's a really long, really narrow district. But the capacity of the buses, we're keeping them to 50% or under, and we are making sure that the buses are filling from the back rather than kids just coming in and sitting wherever they may. And we're also looking at as we get a couple weeks in, we'll be able to have assigned seating very, very quickly in the school year so that once we know who's riding the bus for sure, they can have an assigned seat and we know who's been around them. So if there's ever an issue, we can make sure that we're able to do good contact tracing.
Superintendent, student registration forms are required this year. Has that always been, or is this something new?
Well, I would have to learn a little bit more about the history of the process. Most districts...
What are you trying to learn through those
Basically,
forms?
so our new registration process, what we're trying to learn is how many students are going to be coming to us in person, how many students are interested in distance learning, and we're also asking a lot of questions in that form related to who needs a device, who has a need for a Wi-Fi hotspot. are there childcare needs? So it's really important that we have as many families as possible fill out that survey, because it lets us know the basic information so that we can be really well prepared for them.
In the few seconds we have left,
Sure.
Obviously this is going to be experimental as you jump into it. You need a plan, you've got a plan. Subject to change pretty regularly? It could be subject to immediate change if there was an immediate concern. Just like a snow day, we might have to make sure that we call something if something is occurring. But we're also forming a district committee. It is a district advisory committee made up of parents, teachers, school leaders, community leaders, who will be taking part in conversation around when would we switch and why would we switch. So if we will have decision-making criteria, but we'll be as careful as possible to make sure we're well planned and that we're ready to engage students in safe and worthwhile learning. John Meggis, Duluth School Superintendent, thank you very kindly.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine.
Thank you. Well, at the same time, private schools are discussing their fall plans during the pandemic and the impact of COVID-19 on their enrollment. We reached out to several private schools in the area, and those that responded say they are seeing an increase in enrollment or interest. Stella Maris Academy in Duluth says once they announced their learning plans, applications have gone through the roof. They say even with the surge, they are keeping class sizes small to be sure students have their needs met in the classroom and remotely. Meanwhile, Many Rivers Montessori School in Duluth is also seeing a higher enrollment, about a 5% increase over last year. When it comes to safety now during the pandemic, both schools have similarities in their plans. Stella Maris is offering on-site and remote learning options, and there's an option to start remotely with the ability to return to the classroom. Students and adults must wear face coverings. As for Many Rivers Montessori, they are opening this fall, but are offering a distance learning option for parents to request. They are requiring masks for elementary and middle school students and staff and are maximizing outside time. They say they are willing to shift to distance learning if that becomes necessary. The historic Rainy River along the border Minnesota shares with Canada was once spoiled by pollution. Well, today, the storied waters of the Rainy River are once again running clean and bountiful. That remarkable cleanup is thanks to regulations and hard work by local industry, businesses, and citizens. Here to tell us more is Mike Kennedy, Watershed Project Manager with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Mike, thanks so very much for being here. Well, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency says the Rainy River is in excellent condition. How did that happen?
Boy, it happened by a lot of hard work, Mr. Anderson, by a lot of people up in the Rainy River corridor. As your introduction said, businesses and industries, local citizens upgrading their septic systems, putting in buffers in the agriculture areas, and trying our best to upgrade our sewer systems up there in the various smaller communities. All of that combined has really made a significant difference in the last 50 years or so.
I was going to ask, how long of a period did it take to really clean up the water?
You know, it started to turn the corner somewhere around the late 70s, early 80s. We started seeing some different data, water quality data, and it started to change a little. The trend line started to level out, and if not, get a little better.
Now the Rainy needs protection. From what?
I think it needs protection to help us sustain the good water we have now. We've worked very hard. A lot of community members have worked very hard to get to where we are, and we want to make sure that we can sustain that healthy, good water for future generations, our tourism industry, and so on.
I would assume there's some heavy use of that river. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, the river's very busy with fishing nowadays. Of course, you've got lots of good opportunity to catch a 10-pound walleye or a 5-foot lake sturgeon in that river. And so there's a lot of traffic on the river with recreational fishermen, both from the Canadians and the American side.
The size of the Rainy River watershed is quite large. That includes the Boundary Waters canoe area, does it not?
That's correct. The Rainy River Lake of the Woods watershed is 26,000 square miles,
Wow.
60% in Canada and 40% in the United States, including includes Voyageurs National Park and the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area and much of Superior National Forest.
Aquatic insects have a lot to do with the quality of water. How is that, and are they studied regularly? Are the insects studied?
You know, they are. When we go out and work on these large river programs, we have a fish biologist, an aquatic insect biologist, a chemistry person, and we had several stations, upwards of 10 or 12 stations between the dam in International Falls and the mouth of the river down at Lake of the Woods. Each one of those stations, fish, bugs, and chemistry were analyzed once a month during the open water season for 2 years in a row in order to establish some trends.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how that watershed is managed? I mean, it's the border of not two cities, but two countries.
Oh, it's chock full of geopolitical jurisdictions, that's for sure. There's probably 35 to 50 different political entities that have a stake in the game between Canada, the U.S. We've got municipalities, First Nations on the Canadian side, tribes on the U.S. side, Treaty 3 territory in Canada, which is kind of different for most of us in the States to understand, but it's similar to the 1854 Authority, if people are familiar with that. Counties, cities, soil and water districts. There's a lot of players.
So, Mike, who can use the watershed?
You know, the watershed is used by first of all, lots of ecosystem services, all the little critters and plants that call it home. But people-wise, we have got a lot of hay farming, alfalfa farming in the watershed. We've got a tremendous amount of recreational hunting, fishing, trapping opportunities up in that area, and of course the main thing, fishing often.
And how is fishing up there? Is it a pretty good sport?
It's pretty good. You know, the International Falls, Fort Francis area has attracted anglers for well over 100 years. The whole corridor down the Lake of the Woods has been very popular tourism destination for fishermen throughout time. It's a great place. I am always very fortunate if the locals invite me to go fishing. I'm always one to say I'll
there,
go.
Huh? Sometimes the Rainy River gets a little cloudy. What causes that?
You know, often the whole big parts of the Rainy Basin sit on top of glacial Lake Agassiz, and that old ancient lake bed is very clay, very fine soil that washes around in water often. So when spring melt happens, of course, you know how much snow we get up in that country. It all rushes and melts into the rivers and clouding up the water, and usually it's pretty temporary, lasts a week or so, and then dies back down again.
And that brings up the question, how is water quality managed and monitored?
Most of what we do, we have a philosophy, I think, here in Minnesota where our state agency partners, the MPCA, the DNR, the Board of Soil and Water Resources, Department of Ag, and Department of Health, 5 sister agencies, we work really hard on providing strategies for the locals to implement. The local folks, through their soil and water districts and their county environmental services departments, they choose the the priority areas for protection and the priority areas for restoration, and they pick what projects they want to implement and work on based on the high-level strategies that the state government agencies provide.
It sounds like this watershed, Mike, is always under supervision. Is it always being worked?
You know, parts of it are. There's about 9 major watersheds on the U.S. side. Those range from 1,200 to 1,800 square miles, and we rotate through those about every 10 years. And so we intensively look at one for 4 or 5 years, and then we hand it off to the locals to do projects, and off we go to the next watershed.
Can we mentioned before that, there's 2 different countries here that are really working to manage this watershed. Is it difficult to cross borders if people want to use the watershed?
Well, it used to be pretty easy. Nowadays, of course, the border's closed, and that makes things a little difficult. But traditionally up in that area, there's lots of intermarriages across the borders, lots of family on both sides. It is pretty easy to get back and forth. Even if you don't use the bridges in the road system, they've got a backcountry permit system where you can cross as well.
Are there still a lot of cabins in that area, or are those a thing of the past?
You know, there are quite a few cabins. Of course, nowadays cabin almost looks like a second home to many people, but there's still some of the old mom and pop cabins around.
If somebody were to desire to get up to the Rainy River to just have a wonderful vacation, Is it difficult to get in? Do they need permits? What's the process there, Mike?
No, the process in the Rainy River proper, in the 90-mile corridor between the falls and the big lake, Lake of the Woods, there's no park or entity that you need a permit or anything. There's some resorts on the far western side that rent small boats and such. A lot of bank fishing and recreation on the banks up towards the International Falls side.
Mike Kennedy, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Great story to tell. Thank you so much. We are always looking for story ideas here on the show, and there are several ways you can share those ideas with us. We encourage you to keep up with Almanac North by following us on social media. You'll find us, for example, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Over the next month, we will be rolling out some new features and a whole new look for Almanac North, so watch for that. And be sure to visit the WDSE website for program updates, upcoming events, and more information about the station. And don't forget to download the PBS Video app for on-demand viewing of your favorite programs. Thanks to our guests and the crew here in the studio. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, everyone, and be kind.